The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the Our Culture, Our Stories podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of the NAACP or any affiliated organizations.
I need representation that can do more than just say, I will follow the law, because depending on who's in office, I might be in trouble. Depending on, even if you are in office, if you don't have the Congress that you need to make the laws that you need, I'm still in trouble. So we need representation that can speak from the chest and say it's all of us or none of us.
We're going to get right into it. Of course, we're excited that you're here. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what are some of the key memories you recall that you believe led to where you are now. But take us back. Let's go back to the beginning of Angelica Ross.
Ooh, my origin story, my villain origin story. We're gonna get that one. Yes. Just like Elphaba, I have my origin story. I wasn't always this wicked. But I started out in a small town and it was Racine, Wisconsin. I was born in Kenosha, Wisconsin, but raised right across the border in Racine, Wisconsin. And one of the things that for me is the most prominent uh memory is really the evolution and the growth of mine and my community's Blackness over, sort of my lifetime. I'm talking about like from the crumple of the Jheri curl with the bag that I wore on my head when I went to sleep at night, when I had, the activator and the S curl, to, the members only jackets, to, riding around with my dad in the car, to him listening to Cameo and the Gap Band, and also, we were also listening to Tupac and Machiavelli, and also things I shouldn't have been listening to with my dad. But and just the struggle of a Black family coming up in, what was considered to be the projects in Racine, Wisconsin, and having to deal with the same demons, the same ghosts that are chasing us all, from the drugs in our community to, prostitution, the violence and the gangs that were definitely in our community. Living in Racine, Wisconsin, it seems like a small town, and it is, but the reality was that it was a middle drop-off point between two large cities, between Chicago, Illinois, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So there were a lot of gangs and activity that kind of hit out in the middle in Racine and kind of serviced, the two big cities. So it was definitely a difficult upbringing. My parents both worked very, very hard. My mom is a school teacher, and she taught me how to multiply and read before I entered kindergarten. I knew my multiplication tables and everything. So she really stressed the importance of education. My father worked at a company, and he's been there for over 35 years or so, and has gone from just an entry level position, not having a high school diploma, to, getting his bachelor's degree and becoming vice president of the company. So I come from, a family that really has instilled hard work, but they've also given me this sort of blueprint to say, hey, you've got one strike against you being Black, and another was by gender at the time, be identifying as male, and being a threat to to society. So he's like, you already got two strikes against you. So I was discouraged from doing anything risky. But the thing is, for many of us in marginalized communities, it's a risk to dream. A dream is a risk. And, it can break your spirit if you don't, if you're not in the right spaces with all of that. And so my dad instilled to study business. Even though from kindergarten, I showed that I was a ham. And I mean, from the first grade musical where I played, I think, Sleepy in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I think all they remember was Sleepy because I stole the show. And, then after that to starring in musical theater for the first 11, 12 years of my primary education before I even graduated high school, I was doing community theater. So, not just school plays, but local city theater that I had to audition for, and it just happened to be year after year, I somehow ended up with the lead role. I was cleaning house over there, so all signs pointed towards me being, in acting and music. I was in every church choir, from the children's church choir to the youth choir. I was in the chorale in high school and singing in Italian and learned how to sight read, and I was singing in the jazz choir and all these things, but being in all of these activities in school, being in a struggling Black family, there were a couple things that started to be challenges. One was we had one vehicle in the house, and my parents were using that to get back and forth to work. So anything I wanted to do in school, it was like you got to find a way there and back. And I wasn't, the most popular kid in school, so I didn't have a lot of friends, to do that with. And then my grades.
No.
Yeah, exactly, you know what I mean? And so but I was also starting to show signs of femininity, and so I think that I was starting to be bullied at this time early on, and that's why I was in so many after school activities because it kept me away from the bullies. It delayed the time that I had to walk through the door and hear some sort of frustration of something I didn't do right. I grew up in a household of belts and switches, and we grew up in a house of discipline. I'm very grateful for some of that discipline, but also some of it obviously was, very traumatic.
So around that same time, what was the conversation like with your family, with your parents, with your you said you were starting to show uh other signs of femininity. What was that like in the house?
Well, you have to understand. So my mother, my grandma, my mother comes from a very religious family. So, my grandmother is an evangelical pastor, and so my grandmother kicked my mother out of the house while she was pregnant with me, and that's where my mom moved from West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia, to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and so she carried a lot of that religious oppression with her and passed it, sort of down to me. And so we went to church every Sunday, which, of course, I loved the music and I loved everything else. But when they started preaching all these messages of condemnation and going to hell, for being gay and all this, it was just conflicting in my spirit because I knew I was starting to understand that I was attracted to boys. And so I believe sometimes in families there's this sense of denial that happens, and so there were conversations that were happening that were not happening directly. So the way that it was happening is we were living in a time of Ricky Lake and Jerry Springer and things like that. So I remember certain shows where trans people would show up on TV or gay people would show up on TV. And, my mom would say, "Bet not nobody in my house turn out gay," or something like that. She would just say this kind of out loud. And I'm just like, okay, message received, but it's just like it was very clear in our house what was what. Even before I knew what gay was, it was just that was something not to be. And so even though I like dressing in my mom's shoes, I remember seeing some of her beautiful stiletto shoes and you know, um really to be honest, when I was in Pose and doing some of my final scenes with Candy, there's a scene where Candy says to her mother, "You were my gateway to the feminine." And my mom was definitely, my gateway to the feminine. She was the woman in the neighborhood that everybody was like, "Oh, she's got a shape. She don't have to wear no makeup. She's really she was." My mom with her little fashion fair and everything, she would, just wear a little bit of blush and she would just do a little bit of nothing, not a lot of makeup. And she just would wear these sponge rollers in her hair. I just remember all of this stuff and just remember how beautiful my mom was, but also how and is, but also at that time, how controlling my father was of her presentation, and just not wanting her to have outside attraction, and so the more she was with him, the more she had to sort of start to tone it down and be a mother, so in so many ways, even though growing up in my family, it was not acceptable to be LGBTQ, I told my mother at one point, I said, you need to pay attention because, and I was being sort of blasphemous as I was saying this, but I was just like, just as Jesus had a purpose on his life, so do I. And just as it's just not about Jesus, it was also about Mary. You're going to have your own story too. And I need you to understand, um, it's not just about me discovering my own value. It's about how you communicate to other parents. How in the hell did you get from point A to telling your child to get out or to kill themselves, which my mom gave me an ultimatum to kill myself or she would kill herself, which we talked about on Black Women Own the Conversation on OWN. Um, how do you get from that point
How
to
old were you?
then get I was 15, maybe, about 15. Yeah, so, I do remember, again, my mom had all these medicines in her cabinet, and I just took everything that she had, and, I just remember seeing the Lord's Prayer on the bathroom wall, and, you know, that is when I will tell people that I absolutely heard God talk to me. Like, it was just so clear. It was so clear. And it was just like, "What are you doing? I know exactly who you are. Get up. Get up." And it was like, "I know who you are. Get up and walk, and I'll walk with you," sort of situation. And I just remember waking up and sort of like, thankfully getting rid of all of the stuff that was in my system because it was luckily in the bathroom, and everyone was still asleep. So no one found me in any kind of way, and, they didn't know until years later, until I told them what had happened, and so, it's a situation where my mom is in my life now, she won't stop calling, and, like mothers do, and, and so I needed her to be able to be prepared for that moment on stage when we would be on stage with Oprah's network. Now, not only is it 100 women in the audience, it's millions of people watching. And so you can now give a real testimony about how you learn to love your child unconditionally, how you learn to really have the love of God for your child and not judge. But these are things we're called to love, we're called to not judge, we're called to do these things, and we're still struggling with that. Even years after Pose has been on the air, we're not just fighting Republicans for trans rights, we're fighting people within the apparent Democrat or liberal party. But, we're in an environment where the Republicans want to turn trans women into this boogeyman that's going to hurt your kids in the bathroom and do all of these things, which none of these things are true. There are no incidents of this happening. When you look at the number of people and trans people that actually play sports, it's very minute numbers when you actually look at the numbers. And yet, they spend so much money to put in advertisements throughout the election season about trans people. And the people who represent me as a Democrat, as a liberal, had no response on bodily autonomy when Kamala Harris was in an interview speaking to abortion rights, and she had a clear answer about it being a woman's right to choose and to have bodily autonomy. And then when it came to the trans rights, it was, "I'll follow the law." But we all know that these laws weren't built to support all of us. And so following the law sometimes means enforcing oppression. We all know that. So to follow I need representation that can do more than just say, I will follow the law, because depending on who's in office, I might be in trouble. Depending on, even if you are in office, if you don't have the Congress that you need to make the laws that you need, I'm still in trouble. So we need representation that can speak from the chest and say it's all of us or none of us.
Where does the fear come from, in your opinion? Where does the fear of this boogeyman that you spoke of, where does that come from? Is it just hatred for the unknown, or is it something deeper? Where do you think that comes from with people in general who uh, take such great issue with other people, things that have nothing to do with them?
Well, this is my off the cusp answer to that. And, I believe that we're talking about trauma. We're talking about, what does it look like intersectionally for Black people to recover from the trauma of slavery and racism, a brutal history of that. You got to understand, like we watch Fences with Denzel Washington and Viola Davis, and we see so many times Black men are only focused on their own trauma and unwilling to even recognize right next to them, what does the trauma look like for Black women? What does trauma look like for Black, queer, and trans people that you don't even know are queer and trans yet, because we're such in a oppressed place, who haven't even been able to come out yet, who haven't even been able to say anything. So what you're seeing right now is why I say the trauma of slavery and racism is because we're still trying to get our 40 acres and a mule and so many different ways. And we are going about it sometimes in all the wrong ways, where we think 40 acres and a mule, we think there's this cliche. And what Black men want, so many Black men want, is to have the same freedom to roam this land like white men roam this land, to claim stake and have equity in this country like white men have equity in this country, and they should have that. But they also want the privilege to be at the head of a patriarchal oppressive system, and to treat women like white men treat women, to treat LGBTQ people like white people treat LGBTQ people. And so when white supremacy says you're not supreme if you're not a white man, you're a notch down if you're a white woman, you're a notch down if you're a white gay person, you're a notch down if you're a Black man, you're even another notch down if you're these things. And so if you understand this system and understand within that system, there is power. We know there's power in oppression. So the reality is, we're not just talking about white supremacy. We're talking about patriarchy being a tool of white supremacy, of homophobia and transphobia being tools of white supremacy. So each one of those tools got power with it. So Black men will pick up the tool of patriarchy and have power over women and Black femmes. Black women will pick up the tool of homophobia and transphobia to be pick-me's to the patriarchy. There will be gay people who will pick up the power in transphobia just to be picked by the mainstream, who says we're okay, but that trans stuff is going too far. There is power in aligning with oppressive systems. So we have not yet understood that when we're talking about power, think about a power source and white supremacy using all it can to drain you of your power. How can we poke a hole here, poke a hole here, poke a hole there? So if we as Black people have all this power, but we say, "Ah," but not those people with that bipolar, keep them out the way, and not those people who are trans and gay, we're poking holes in our own boat. We're losing power, because what I say is, there is no place around this world where Blackness does not exist. And if we can acknowledge and ignite the power and Blackness around the world and come together with it, then there's nothing these people could do against us. But the reason why we lost is because it's like the devil. And my mom would say the devil is the light or the devil is busy. What I learned about that, and I'm not even Christian, I'm a Buddhist. But what I learned is that the devil looks for an opening in to get in and start to cause chaos. And so the reality is when there's a vulnerability or an opening. So now you got Republicans over here causing all kind of chaos, anti-immigrant, anti-trans people, anti-black people. They want police. They want all the bad stuff, right? Now, on the liberal side where we want to champion the rights of all people, we're all there, except there's somebody over there who thinks we should build the wall and keep Mexicans out of the country. And so we're our whole fight is now weakened because someone in our side agrees with them. So now they got some of us over there. Oh, we got a little bit over there. Now someone agrees that trans people should not be able to go to the same bathroom that they identify as. So that's another chunk of people. Now they don't agree on the same thing, but they're still giving power to the situation. So now when we want to get everybody's votes, and Kamala can't say trans rights are not up to the state, that it's bodily autonomy, just like every woman, man, and child should have bodily autonomy over their body, because we cannot say there will be it's like, now we all know it was a shenanigans around that ceasefire. We're working around the clock and we're not working around the clock. Israel's telling her to her face, Madam Vice President, there will be no ceasefire. There's all kind of shenanigans. And she's saying they are actively going against us with trying to conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. You are now then taking college students out the mix who read books and are going to college to know stuff. And now you're telling them the word that they have been taught, anti-Zionism, is now anti-Semitism. And they don't know what apartheid actually looks like or means. We're undermining our own people in the movement, and now we're wondering why we are where we are. It's because someone on our side agrees with what's going on right now. That's why they're starting with Mexicans and trans people. When they get done with us, they're coming for you next.
Future in politics? Have you thought about running for office?
I have been working on a discovery process of my path to office here in Georgia. I have been meeting with various Democrats here. Renita Shannon, who is a former House representative, has been consulting with me on my potential run. Bruce Franks Jr. out of St. Louis also has been, consulting me and letting me know just kind of how to get prepared and what to look for. I have gone to several candidate trainings to sort of prepare myself for all of this as well. So, I am preparing myself to run for office. The problem I'm having right now is the state of the Democratic Party, and the fact that I may be too leftist, I may be too liberal, too progressive for the establishment that's happening right now. So, if in my heart of hearts, I would rather run independent because that's what our country has been asking for, is for this two-party system to be dismantled. But the problem is that if we truly want a democracy, then why is it that the Democrats are the ones suing so that third-party options are not on the ticket? That should be something out of the Republican playbook. But you're telling me that the Democrats want to make sure that no more voices are in it? That don't seem like something we should be, we should be standing for. Because what I know, at the very least, love or hate Jill Stein, Bernie Sanders, Cornel West, Claudia de la Cruz, any of them. Imagine if Kamala had to answer real questions instead of the stupid questions that coming from Donald Trump, and and had a worthy adversary of Cornel West or somebody bringing up a real question because at the very least, just like Hillary Clinton got pushed more liberal through debates when she was running, like iron, she could have been prepared better for all of this by having to answer harder questions, because we didn't do it that way. they were unwilling to answer the hard questions from the voters because I have pictures with Kamala Harris. I have spoken one-on-one with her. I have hosted a presidential debate when she was running for president. So she knows me very well. I full well wanted to support and was rooting for Kamala Harris. I personally had conversations with her and Joe Biden about keeping open a pipeline of accountability and conversation. But they did a couple different things along the way that broke that integrity for me. And as I tried to get accountability on that, they stopped answering those questions. So again, when we're as voters trying to ask these questions and they're saying, excuse me, I'm speaking, and I'm not just talking about genocide, I'm talking about Cop City. I'm talking about trans rights. I'm talking about the fact that Medicaid hasn't been expanded here. I'm talking about the fact that the Equality Act hasn't been passed yet, and we're under Biden, who said that they would pass it. So you tell me, when Biden promised us he would do these things and hasn't done it because he doesn't have the Congress or he doesn't have the things, what will you do if you don't have the Congress and have those things? How are you going to stand on business?
So we've got so much. I've got so many questions for you, and we've got so much to talk to. We could literally talk to you all day.
And y'all might have to edit this. Yes, absolutely.
It's all good. We're just honored to have you. I do want to ask you before we move on, though. Do you think that America would hire a woman to run the country? Do you think America, black or white, do you think America, just based on all that you said, would elect a woman to be president of the highest office in the world? Do you think that America would do that? Or
I think so. Um, I do think so. And the reason why I say I think so is because it's all a game of politics. So, um, Barack Obama got in there and you know what I'm saying? Like he put a fire under me when he first ran. He inspired me beyond belief with the hope and change of his sort of presidency. Um, he really fit the bill for the moment of what we needed. And, it's not until years later and you really know about a lot of the things and participation around why he wasn't the best. He ain't the worst amongst all the presidents, you understand what I'm saying? But he definitely has some critiques around deporting so many people, deporting more people than Trump, around a lot of the undermining of the Black Lives Matter movement, which Alicia Garza talks about a lot in her book, Purpose of Power. So I do think that they would elect a black woman, and I do think that Kamala Harris was very close to being that black woman. It's just that she was in a impossible situation, I believe. I think she was in a very impossible situation. I wouldn't say impossible. But they put themselves in a possible situation, meaning because there are other choices. There always are other choices. If you tell yourself this is going to not be a good choice because of X, Y, and Z, that's all understandable. But there still is another choice. And so she had a choice to completely divorce herself from Biden's stance on the war. And I mean, again, the only problem is you're currently the vice president. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, so she's in a situation, but that's what makes a situation hard to run in the first place. Cause then it's really not a good situation to begin with because we can't get a candidate who is truly running on their own steam. She has to run on it doesn't make, it didn't make a lot of sense. But I think that if she was in the right I think that America loves a good performance and they love a good symbol of change. So if they could get the right woman to look like the right symbol of change, and I don't think it's hard to say what woman will be the right one because the box is hard to get into when it comes to what they want you to fit into. But I do think that if a woman subscribed to a certain level of patriarchy, to a certain level of, and she just could wear wear the suit as well as Barack Obama wore it, like Michelle Obama does. But if Michelle Obama was as qualified as Kamala Harris is, that's the woman I think that they would put in the office.
okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that opinion. Angelica Ross, you heard it here first, is headed to Congress.
Yeah, so stay tuned. I'm gonna need your money because I'm a black trans woman, and you know I ain't got it like that. I don't come from trust funds like these other people do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we'll support your run. You heard it
Thank
here.
you.
Moving on a little bit, we want to educate those who may have a misunderstanding or be misinformed or gaps in their understanding of gender, identity, and sexuality. Can you explain the difference between gender and sexuality for those who may not know?
Huh. Well, to keep it simple, sexuality is who you are attracted to, who you go to bed with. Gender is who you go to bed as. So that's the difference. Sexuality is who you go to bed with. Gender is who you go to bed as, who you wake up as. And so, you know, the reality is neither one of those things are so rigidly defined. And the struggle that people are having is that they want to define the undefinable. And it's almost as blasphemous as trying to define God, because the experience is one of connection. It's one of authentic connection. It's one of authentic nature. And so what I mean by that is, in Buddhism, we learn about a concept called the 10 factors. And the 10 factors are basically 10 factors or layers of a person. There is the appearance. That's only one factor. Then there's also my nature. That means what's natural to me. So you can't just judge things by what you see, because what is natural for me is not natural to your system. Your system doesn't respond the same way to tree nuts as mine does. I have an allergy. So it really seriously is a situation where we have to allow people to define life on their own terms. This is when we get to actually start to see what life looks like uninhibited. This is what it starts to look like when we don't give our children a box to go into and saying, as black people, you can only do this and you can only do that. You can go to the military, or you can do sports or music, or you got to do this or you got that. What happens when we say, show me who you are? Like Maya Angelou says, when people show you who they are, believe them. Well, we can't if we don't give them a chance to tell us who they are. And we tell them, this is who you are. I know who I had. I had a boy. I had a girl. I had a straight boy. I had somebody that's a man, whatever the people try to tell us.
Okay. Why is it important that we educate people in this way? And does education play uh, a role? How does education factor into the fight for equality?
I, I can explain it as best as I can when you look at a movie like Precious, you know. Um, And I don't think as a Black community maybe, and as, just a whole, we understood just how abusive we can be to our own people. Um, how fat phobic, how xenophobic and ableist that we can be. We have people in our Black families who deal with all kind of mental health issues, but because we're not educated on what that looks like and what people are dealing with, we sometimes hide those people in our family. We don't have understanding at the very least. At the bottom line, there's no understanding. So the same goes, for trans people. We need to have education, because when you watch a story like Precious, you might not see yourself in Precious, who was overweight and being abused. but you might see yourself in Precious's mother and not realize what part of the story you're playing and not be able to see yourself. That's why having stories like Pose, too often we have people saying, I just remember working with some Black activists and trying to call them in on talking more about LGBTQ issues. And they're like, well, that's not my community. And I'm just like, baby, sweetie, yes, it is. Being Black and being LGBTQ are not mutually exclusive. So just like you grew up listening to Anita Baker, so did I while my mom was cleaning the house. Just like you watched Thriller and lived the sensation and learned all the choreography moves to Rhythm Nation also, so did I. So we have more in common than we think, and we don't understand that when we're all out here fighting white supremacy, and we know how hard this fight has been. Imagine how much harder that fight is when we have to fight each other for no reason, for no good reason.
Let's talk about Pose. You were a member of the largest trans cast for a scripted series ever. Groundbreaking. And the show received a lot of love. You would say it made you a star? You're already a star from kindergarten on when you were still in the
It definitely shot me into the universe, into a bigger stardom. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. What's the significance of a show like Pose? And how did it continue to mold you, that little one from Wisconsin?
Well, it's interesting. My experience being on the show Pose did not mold me as much as it affirmed me. Um, I can really say that being an actor, uh, going on so many auditions, especially being a cis assumed actor, which means when I go into a lot of rooms, people don't know all the time if I'm trans. So it depends on the role that I am auditioning for. So many times I would audition for trans roles and I would get denied for those roles because they said I wasn't trans enough. They were like, we need the audience to get it right away. And this thing, or I'm just like, but this is what everyday trans people look like. But okay. So, and then there were, times I'm auditioning for other roles and just feeling insecure. Um, and so the first the first really strong affirmation I had was the Emmy nomination that I received for this small web series called Her Story. You can still see it on YouTube. It has 6 episodes. Each episode's only like 8 minutes. And we received an Emmy nomination for that short web series. And I just remember it was the first time as an actor that I didn't have to do double duty. And what I mean by that is there's the job of the actor, and then I'm doing another job of acting to not be found out as a trans person when I'm doing roles that are not, trans specific. So I've done plenty of. I was in Little John and the East Side Boys music video in the background. I did commercials, all kind of things where people did not know I was trans, and so I was scared of being found out. Um, and I just remember doing that small project with trans directors, trans actors, and everything, and being able to drop my shoulders and like realize I trust the person who's behind the camera to see me as I am. I trust the director. I trust, everybody. And so by the time I got to Pose some years later, I had done transparent. I'd done a role on CBS on Doubt. I had done a season of Claws with Carucci and Niecy Nash on season 1 of Claws. And so when Pose came calling, my name had been known. People had been around, and when I got into the environment, I thought it was gonna be like a Sex and the City sort of experience with 5 trans women, this big cast, and what have you. And then I realized that they were gonna be focusing more on the light-skinned girls and that, the dark-skinned girls were gonna start to become a little bit of the villains of the story and sort of the B, C, and D storylines of the situation. And so it was made clear to me that I wasn't going to be the star of that show or that, uh, and I was, there was many ways throughout this experience that I was kinda told to, stay in my place sort of situation. But
Still in the
before
show.
I doing the
Just
show, yes,
no,
like they were doing.
you steal the show everywhere you go, right? You talk to
Oh,
the
thank you know just turn on the camera.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We
So, before I got when I was doing the audition, I found an acting coach, from a friend or what have you, and did not know this acting coach, got with her, r through conversation, realized the acting coach was also a Buddhist from the same Buddhist organization and a leader, and so we kinda, like, talked about it and manifested it, and she told me, she was like, "You're gonna get this role and be on this show, and it's going to put a ripple effect out into the world of having people understand that there is life beyond like an HIV diagnosis or beyond, being marginalized in society." And when I did not get the role of Blanca, I was so confused and traumatized 'cause I was like, "What do you mean?" Like everything spiritually set up that way was telling me that I was going to have this role. And then when I got on set and realized I had to kind of wait my turn till my line or my scenes and whatever, uh as I organically grew as a character on that show, what was to be mine could not be stopped. What was for me was for me.
yes.
So
So
what she
can
spoke into existence actually ended up happening, but just not the way I thought it would.
right, right, which is how life often is, isn't it? So your character Candy, uh, spoiler alert for those who may not know, Candy met her demise. Uh, the character Candy, whom you play. How do you identify with what happened with that character? Are you good with it, or would you? I see you smiling. Uh, or- you go ahead. You go ahead and answer that. Yeah. What are your thoughts on? Go ahead.
Well, so my thoughts are this. I'm an actor, and what I was called to do for this project to pose was to act my ass off, and that I did. And so I did my job. I did what I came to do. I did what needed to be done. What I will say though, outside of that, is that art, especially television, film, it's a collaboration from the grips to the lighting people to the camera person, the writers, the directors, producers, and the talent, wardrobe. So, what I love about and miss about being on sets and acting is the collaboration because I can't have my way when there's so many different inputs on what is going on. Uh, so to know that now, do I think that there were some anti-blackness and some various things that kind of showed their head in the situation? Absolutely. Do I think that I think that Ryan Murphy as a gay white male, also had some uh I wanna say blind spots, but I know there's ableist, so I can't think of another term for it at the moment, but just had some places that he couldn't see being a gay man and not fully understanding the position of, you know, trans women and Black trans women, so I know that, watching the show, you could see it's like a little bit of a tug of war between, is this story centering, trans women or is it centering gay men, and understanding the need of trans women to have things like a love story and a wedding when sometimes we don't get to see that aspiration in real life. So, it was a very affirming experience for me because what I know about luck is that being on pose was not luck. It's not lucky if an opportunity comes along and you're not prepared for it. And what I know is that my life prepared me for this moment. My life doing acting for all those years in community theater prepared me for this moment. My life having my mother tell me to kill myself or she was going to kill herself prepared me to bring all of this emotion to the role of Candy. So what Pose did for me was affirm that you are exactly who you know yourself to be. One of my favorite films is Memoirs of a Geisha. And I remember the little girl, Japanese girl, finally growing up and meeting the love of her life. And she says, "Don't you see? Every moment, every step I have taken has led me here to you." And I have just literally felt this way about the way my life is unfolding right now. Everything that I have experienced has given me context to how I am now to respond to the life and the challenges that I've been faced with.
I want to talk about more inclusivity. Uh, but first, what are your thoughts when you hear that the NAACP is rolling out this new podcast series, Our Culture, Our Stories? And they say, we want you as a guest. We want you to come and share your journey with us. What's the first thing that comes to mind for you when an organization, the oldest civil rights organization in the land, right?
I would say that's a start.
Okay.
It's a start. And the reason why I say it's a start is because I am not new to the NAACP. We see each other. We know each other. We know each other for a while. I've spoken at town halls at NAACP, events before. And so there are many things that I have talked about. And so for me, I think this is a good start. But I have also talked about the leadership at NAACP having a more serious relationship with queer and trans leaders like myself, and having more messaging as strong as the messaging that America had with Uncle Sam and saying, "We want you," not "we tolerate you," not, well, I guess it's about time we show y'all some love or whatever. No, we need you. We want you. We actually, and because the reality is, I'm a put it as plain as simple as this. We have not crossed the line of freedom because we are still participating in oppression by following a cishet patriarchal playbook. And so when our community is consistently led by cishet, usually Christian led, baby turn to BET, Bobby Jones Gospel, image, everything is all in this sort of box. And I need for us to understand that as long as we are still trying to have Black straight men leading the movement, we're not going to get there. And I want to say that one more time clearly for the folks in the back. As long as we continue to not have Black, queer, and trans leadership at the front of the movement, we're not going to get where we want to. As long as we keep going to Black Lives Matter rallies, and I can hear go somewhere with that gay-ish, or I can know that Black women can be violated in that space, or Black trans women can be unsafe also in that space, we need to look towards Raquel Willis, Angelica Ross, Hope Giselle, uh, Teak Milan. There are so many Black, queer, and trans leaders who have been on the grounds fighting for all of us. They're not going to leave y'all out. they're not going to end up being the ones that saying, hey, since y'all treated us bad all this time, we don't want y'all to have rights. No, they're going to say, hey, I'm Black when I wake up, but I'm also this when I wake up. So I need you all to want to start following Black, trans, and queer leadership and having that relationship and putting them in the organization at the front of the movement. We need that like yesterday.
So somebody might say to that, why is it necessary to be at the front? What about side by side? What about a
Yeah, because the reason why they need to be up front is because for the same reason that you don't put a white man, because they do this all the time. There are white people who have been in the position as the diversity, equity, diversity, inclusion officer because they're gay,
right?
but they're the one in the position.
Yep.
And we have to deal with the fact that they are short-sighted because those white gay men don't understand the full experience of Black, queer, and trans people. So the fact that you have representation that are currently not in the forefront being intersectional. The difference is if you had someone like Richie, I forget his last name, or even let's say, you got your conscious leads, you've got Mark Lamont Hill, you've got certain folks who know how to speak on behalf of all of us. But
Richie
the
from
leaders
York.
who
Richie is that the congressperson out of New York that you're speaking of?
not Richie Torres. No, he can go kick rocks. He's a problem, a Zionist problem. Um, and we have to recognize when people are all skin folk and kin folk, and he's one of them. And so no, I'm talking about he's a prison abolitionist activist. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but there are plenty of Black because again, it can be a Black gay man like Dr. David Johns, who is with the NBJC, the National Black Justice Coalition. And so, they bring him in a lot of spaces as well. And I might say they because I think they also might identify as non-binary, but he is always speaking to the queer and trans lens, and he's a Black man. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a Black trans person, but it has to be someone who can speak to the whole. And right now we have leadership that does not know how to speak to the whole. It is very, very clear.
Okay. So we take that same frame of thought as it relates to the entertainment industry, Broadway, and the directors' chairs and writers, etc. Do you think that that's also what it takes to have more of this?
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. How important do you think it was to have Black directors and writers and producers?
100%.
Not important at all, right?
Totally important. Totally important.
So if you understand that the change and difference that makes when you have participation at the table, then you can understand the loss that the Black community has gone through by not having us at the table. They've been missing out on a lot of flavor and coloring, just as white people been missing out on seasoning on some of their meals that have been leaving out the flavor. Let's get it straight. Black straight folks have been leaving a lot of flavor out of the situation too, and trying to co-opt it, thinking that they can steal our language, stealing all kind of gay language, and don't even know what it means.
Let's talk about trans tech social. What is it and how can people support it?
Trans Tech is a nonprofit organization I founded over 10 years ago in 2014. And it's an online and offline community of LGBTQ plus folks and allies, but with a focus on centering the most marginalized in our community, Black and brown trans folks. And that includes Black and brown trans folks who also don't have legal status in this country, or English isn't their first language. So we service a community intersectionally by understanding that everybody has value, but that we all have different challenges, and some of us have multiple layers of those challenges. So when we have resources, we help people to get certified in like cybersecurity, project management, data analysts, UX and UI design. We give our members free access to LinkedIn learning trainings, master class, the Linux Foundation, we have a partnership with that helps with certification. So at this point, we offer our community a pipeline to basically determining life on their own terms, because technology at the intersection of transition. And what I mean by that is not just physical transition. I'm talking about people who have been incarcerated for decades under this America and are now coming out into an environment of AI and all kind of technology that they don't even know up from down. That people are now who are gonna have to learn new skills. They're gonna transition from the world they once knew to this more technological world. And so we say, "We serve you too." So what was so amazing is when we had a partnership with folks like Afrotech, and Afrotech was able to pay for so many of our members of Trans Tech to go to Afrotech for free, to show that we want to bring our Blackness together, the whole spectrum, and understanding that Blackness and LGBTQ are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes we are one and the same at the same damn time. So right now, we need donations, because obviously grants and things like that aren't trying to fund nonprofits, but also when it comes to Black trans-led initiatives, we are the last to be funded. Trans initiatives get 1% of the funding that goes to funding nonprofits, and especially when it's Black trans led, we're not It Gets Better. We're not the nonprofits that get big glossy fundraisers for what have you, but we still do so much important work by making sure that no matter what people look like, no matter what their abilities are, that they can learn some tech skills and work remotely from wherever they are around the world. No matter how oppressive their local laws might be, their employment laws might be, they can actually just connect online and find work and opportunities.
How'd you end up in that space?
Ha! I ended up so you got my village, my village. You got my villain origin story the first time. Now you're about to get my hoe origin story. So
Uh-oh.
trans tech started from my hoe origin story. And so
Uh-oh.
basically, yes, get ready for this one. So basically, as a Black trans woman who every time I showed my ID for employment to the job application process, and they saw the male gender marker on my ID, I either would get fired, sometimes I would get in, and because they didn't notice right away, they weren't looking too closely at the ID or what have you, and, but eventually when they found out I was trans, I would be fired. Many times I was harassed on the job, bullied on the job, things like that. I filed complaints to the Equal Employment Opportunity Council. This was over 2 decades ago. So after being fired from so many jobs, I was being told by the girls that, "Hey, I know a girl that can help you out, and, if you are willing to pose on her website, um, she helps you be able to pay for surgeries and hormones and things like that," or whatever. So I was trafficked into the sex industry, and the reason why I specifically use the word traffic, because the thing that our community doesn't understand about sex trafficking is this element of coercion that says, "Sweetie, what else are you gonna do?" To the Nigerian person who comes to this country who doesn't speak the language and gets trafficked into hair braiding or into anything else, when you don't have the documentation or you don't speak the language, what else are you going to do, sweetie? Go back to that job where they're going to call you on and harass you and then fire you? So being trafficked into the space to say, well, at least this man will give you $250 and tell you you're beautiful. They won't, so the situation is that I was trafficked into the adult industry posing on websites, not even knowing what sexy was before I could sell it. I didn't even know what it was and I was selling it. And I was 19 years old. And so it was through a serendipitous moment when the person who owned the adult website saw me and they said, "You are a little savvy on that computer." They said, "How about instead of posing on the website, you just help me update the website every month and uh, crop these pictures?" Because she would take hundreds of pictures of each girl and load them onto this website. I mean, really exploiting these girls. And I would be cropping the pictures, seeing all my sisters in all these different positions and all these different truck stops and all this kind of stuff. And you know, I would design the front page so that the members knew that it was new content coming up. I learned about web hosting and FTP uploads. And all of a sudden, I was being a web developer and a web manager. I then went online and it was something called it's called LinkedIn Learning now, but it was called lynda.com. And I went to lynda.com and I taught myself how to do WordPress, CSS, HTML. I taught myself how to code and do the stuff for the adult website. And then I realized this is not exactly the content that I want to be focusing on. And I know that there's more for me out there. So I started a creative design agency and I was doing web development, graphic design, photography, photo retouching, all kind of things for over 10 years under my brand Maizen Studios. So what led me to trans tech was realizing I got out of posing on that website by running the website. And so I saw a blueprint all of a sudden. And I thought to myself, if I could teach other people how to do this tech skills, then they wouldn't have to exploit themselves. Or if they did want to exploit themselves, at least they were the ones who could run the website and not let somebody else be running their website. So I brought this experience to a moment when in Chicago in 2012, they were having something called Chicago House, the first of its kind that would have trans housing, trans healthcare, trans legal, and trans works, which was trans employment. And they hired me for the person to develop that program specifically for employment for trans people. That was a spinoff off of a program they were working with people who were dealing with HIV, being incarcerated, and what have you. So through that experience, I learned how to do job development and career coaching with people who were dealing with the most challenging circumstances. And to be able to tell them, because a lot of times they were talking to white people and they would be like, "What do you know?" And I'd say, "You want to know, sweetie, what I know? I know, I know. Because I come from the streets and selling my body too. And I know that you can get up out of this." And so, because I was trying to teach them tech skills in that position, the nonprofit I was working for at the time said that tech skills were over the heads of the people that we were serving. They said that they would not get tech. And I felt that they were extremely undervaluing and underestimating my community. So in 2012, that is when 2012 or 13 is when I quit that job and then I founded Trans Tech. No lifeboat tied to the, side, no income, nothing. I ended up going into severe debt. My credit score took a tumble. I was living in my office for a while and taking showers at the gym, you know, uh, just to make this dream come alive in the beginning. But that's the sacrifice that I had to make in order to build Trans Tech that is now standing 10 years later with no funding.
Hmm. Who are your
Little to no funding, I should say.
yeah? Who are your mentors?
I have had the pleasure of having so many amazing mentors throughout my life. Dr. Jamie Washington of the Washington Consulting Group, who taught me how to be a fearless educator on racism and anti-blackness and institutional racism. Um, Urvashi, a Indian woman who has since passed away, but it was just big in the social justice movement. Folks like Brittany Packnett Cunningham and you know uh, people in the movement who have been doing this work, Alicia Garza, Feminista Jones, Tamika Mallory. And when I say mentors like that because, some of these people I have direct relationships with, and some of them I are mentoring me with their life's work. You know what I mean? But I've had the blessing and fortune to be able to reach out to folks like Cheryl Lee Ralph, who, has spoken life into me and my career, who was this one of the big reasons why I took the role as Roxy Hart in Chicago, the lead role on Broadway. Um, the pay was not cute, and I felt undervalued, and so I called I actually ran into Cheryl Lee Ralph at one of Janet Jackson's, birthday parties, and she was like, "Hey, I gotta talk to you about something." I was like, "Hey, Cheryl, I need to talk to you about something too." And, I asked her about it, and she told me, she's like, "Listen, sweetie, that's what they do to all of us. They undervalue all of us." And she told me that this opportunity was not about them, it was about me. And it was about having this moment that would affirm, I am that girl. I am that Broadway star. And to be honest, when you have to sing and dance difficult Fosse choreography for 8 shows a week, and I rose to the occasion. After doing that, I felt like I could do anything because, yes, it wasn't about them. It was about affirming that I actually can do more than I thought I could if I actually applied the sort of discipline that Broadway stars apply because they don't. When you're doing 8 shows a week, there's a lot of discipline around what your life looks like. And so I now have that discipline around my life and I don't step outside my house unless it's to make money or unless, I'm doing something that is truly valuable for my life.
I've got one more question for you. What do you like most about yourself now at this age where you are?
It's funny because the thing that I like most about myself is also the thing that gives me the most struggle. I used to begrudge what we Buddhists call begrudge my life, meaning I really didn't value my life as as evidenced by me trying to take my life at one point, as evidence of me living in a world that was telling me my life had no value. So going from a place of begrudging my life to getting to a place where what I love most about myself is my perspective, and it's unique. It is what it is because I am who I am specifically. And so what I love most is that no matter how hard I try, when I see something, I can't unsee it. And so what I love and sometimes don't love about myself is that when I know something's wrong, when I know there's an injustice, when I know that we should be speaking up, when I know something needs to be done, no matter the consequence, no matter what I face to lose, I will do it anyway. And I love that about me, but it has also made my life more challenging than it probably has had to be. I'm grateful for integrity. I'm grateful for conviction. I'm grateful for knowing with a capital K, knowing myself in a way that no one can spread a lie about me or tell me something untrue about myself that would make me believe any more than when I used to believe that I was not anything, you know, less than valuable, less than what I am, less than beautiful, less than powerful. So I love that I am unapologetic. I love that I am unwavering. I love that I am unmoved. and who I am. And, you know, I get emotional thinking about it because there has been every effort to make it so that it wasn't that way. And I still have people trying to put me in my place and break me. But I will not be broken. The only thing you can do is break me open, which makes my capacity for loving and for doing so much more.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate, the space.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the Our Culture, Our Stories podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of the NAACP or any affiliated organizations.